Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Montreal, Canada on November 23rd, 2025. Today, I'm going to talk about three topics. The first will be Trump's surprising meeting with New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani. What was surprising about that meeting, if you haven't heard of it or seen any part of it, is that Trump suddenly appears to have become a huge fan of Mamdani. Now, why did that happen? That's the issue of the day, and I'm going to be discussing that in the first part of this report. Second, I'll discuss the topic of Israel's toxic brand. Israel's image around the world is now so radioactive that, in my view, the withdrawal of Western government support is inevitable. It's just a matter of when, not if. And third, I'll update you on recent troubling developments in occupied Palestine and Lebanon. Before I begin with our first topic, I'd like to remind you to please like and share this video if you find it to be informative. And if you're not already a subscriber, please become one. I think we just surpassed the threshold of 112,000 subscribers. We continue to grow at a brisk pace, but you can help us reach a broader audience with our unapologetic brand of resistance journalism. If you like, share our videos and become a subscriber. Now let's turn to the bizarre meeting between Donald Trump and Mamdani. Anyone who followed the election race in New York City would have understood that Mamdani's primary obstacle to victory was probably the Zionist lobby. Zionists in and outside of New York City were horrified and apoplectic that Mamdani openly described Israel's assault on Gaza as a genocide. Even worse, from their perspective, Mamdani vowed to have the war criminal Netanyahu arrested if he stepped foot in the Big Apple. To grasp just how much this infuriated Zionists, you have only to watch the speech of Morton Klein at the Zionist Organization of America's annual gala held on November 9th, 2025. Klein is the organization's national president, and here's some of what he had to say.
Well, thank you so much. I'm here to give you what this audience needs. One more speech.
I'm just pausing there. It's just wild how they sort of present this as the beginning to Johnny Carson or Jay Leno. And you'll see that this character, Klein, has an annoying tic. I don't know if he suffers from some kind of disability. I don't mean to offend anybody if he does. But he pretty much comes off as a psychopath, more so because of the words that will now come out of his mouth than any annoying and bizarre habits that he has. Listen to what he had to say.
First of all, you don't have to worry, I've shortened my remarks dramatically. Change. Because of open borders, the number of Muslims in New York has gone from 10 years ago, 100,000 Muslims, to 1 million. Yes, the demographics have changed. The people of America has not changed so much, but the demographics have changed. That's what happened. And also large numbers of conservative right-of-center people have left New York, moved to Florida and elsewhere. You had a totally different demographic. That explains one of the reasons this vicious, communist, racist, Jew-hating, Israel-bashing monster was elected.
You heard it, folks. He's a monster, Zohran Mamdani. Now, if you thought that that was crazy, you ain't seen nothing yet. Listen to the balance of this rant.
And what's frightening, though, there's a huge danger that Jew hatred and Israel bashing has become a badge of conscience and enlightenment. There's been a moralization and legitimization and mainstreaming of bigotry against Jews. Bigotry is disguised as principle. Hatred is baptized as virtue. Hostility to Israel now indicates decency and high morals. We at the ZOA will fight these dangerous and monstrous lies with all of our hearts and souls. No appeasement, no conciliation, only a war against this racist hatred of the Jewish people. As Barbara Tuchman said, the rule of human behavior is that yielding to an enemy's demands does not satisfy them, but by exhibiting a position of weakness, it augments the enemy. It doesn't terminate hostility, it excites hostility. Our Torah teaches us to fight Jew hatred, be strong, proud, and powerful Jews, work to strengthen the Jewish state, raise proud Jewish children, give them a Jewish education, attend synagogue, build Jewish institutions, and tell your kids to marry Jewish people. Reduce the amount of intermarriage. We need more Jews, not less.
We need more Jews, not less. Wow. No intermarriage. It's a blasphemy for a Jew to marry a non-Jew. You know, I grew up in a family run by two Greek immigrants who came to Canada in the 1950s, and they were pretty nationalistic, my mother and father. By the way, neither of them had a high school education. They grew up on a fairly poor farm in the south of Greece during the Great Depression and the brutal Nazi occupation, and then the Civil War that followed, which, by the way, was largely provoked by Winston Churchill. And, you know, I have to confess that when I was a kid growing up, and I had three sisters, you know, we were told in no uncertain terms that our parents preferred that we marry Greeks. You know, and over time, they became rather open to the idea that we would marry Greeks. And in fact, I never did marry a Greek. I did get married, but I didn't marry a Greek. And they were perfectly fine with that. And they got along well with my wife. But they did encourage us when we were kids to marry Greeks. That's true. However, I can assure you that my parents never would have stood up at a podium at a public event and bellowed at the top of their lungs that we need more Greeks. No, that kind of behavior, even my mother and father, my fairly nationalistic mother and father, would never have engaged in. It's simply unthinkable. In any case, before I move on to discuss the relevance of all of this to the Trump Mamdani love fest in the White House on Friday of this week, I just want to digress for a moment and talk about Israel's toxic brand, which will be the second subject of my report today. I think that what you just saw is perfectly emblematic of how horrible and ineffective, in fact, counterproductive Zionist propaganda has become. I mean, this is the guy that the Zionist Organization of America chose to be its top dog. Are you kidding me? There's nothing remotely sympathetic about this guy. And whatever his own personal opinions may be, you know, the Zionist propagandists of yesteryear would have understood that standing up at a podium and saying those things in that way was not likely to win you a lot of fans from the non-Zionist community, and in fact was more likely to alienate a considerable proportion of the population, particularly in an era of America First. But this is a demonstration of the principle that I often invoke, or the phenomenon, I should say, not principle, and that is that impunity makes people stupid. Even people who have an inherent, you know, intellectual sophistication, if they get away with wrongdoing over and over again, over a sustained period of time, and they never experience accountability for their depravity, their crimes, their immorality, their unethical behavior, then they let their guard down and they become less cognizant of the risks of overstepping the bounds of decency and doing so in a very public manner. And you're seeing this in Technicolor with the Zionist lobby. These people have gotten away quite literally with mass murder, if not them personally, then the state for which they advocate, for so long that they've really lost touch with the art of propaganda and have become their own worst enemy. Now, with that little digression, let's return to the subject of the Mamdani-Trump press conference, shall we? As you saw, you can hardly express more hatred for a politician than Klein expressed for Mamdani in this tirade. And of course, it wasn't peculiar to Klein. This was, you know, these were sentiments, hateful, offensive sentiments that were being expressed by Zionists across the political spectrum in and outside of New York City for months leading up to the election of Mamdani. Now, I'm going to show you a clip from the Trump Mamdani press conference at the White House in an attempt to make sense of what happened there on November 21st. Now, as you watch this, bear in mind that before their meeting at the White House, Trump called Mamdani a communist lunatic and threatened to arrest Mamdani if he tried to prevent ICE from arresting people in New York City and deporting them. Trump also said that any Jew who voted for Mamdani was a self-professed Jew hater and a stupid person. So here's the beginning of that press conference.
Great meeting, a really good, very productive meeting. We have one thing in common. We want this city of ours that we love to do very well. And I wanted to congratulate the mayor. He really ran an incredible race against, a lot of smart people, starting with the early primaries against some very tough people, very smart people. And he beat them easily. And I congratulated him. And we talked about some things in very strong common, like housing and getting housing built, and food and prices, and the price of oil is coming way down. That anything I do is going to be good for New York. If I can get prices down, it's good for New York, and we've got them down, way down from last year. We have, as you know, I've been saying to a lot of people, Walmart said that Thanksgiving this year is exactly 25% less than last year. So that's good for New York, good for everybody. But I just want to congratulate. I think you're going to have hopefully a really great mayor. The better he does, the happier I am, I will say. There's no difference in party. There's no difference in anything. And we're going to be helping him to make everybody's dream come true, having a strong and very safe New York. And congratulations, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Please.
A really great mayor. He's suddenly morphed from a communist lunatic and a Jew-hating monster to a really great mayor. So let's hear the brief remarks from Mamdani in response to Trump's lavish praise.
I appreciated the meeting with the president, and as he said, it was a productive meeting focused on a place of shared admiration and love, which is New York City, and the need to deliver affordability to New Yorkers, the 8.5 million people who call our city their home, who are struggling to afford life in the most expensive city in the United States of America. We spoke about rent, we spoke about groceries, we spoke about utilities, we spoke about the different ways in which people are being pushed out, and I appreciated the time with the president, I appreciated the conversation. I look forward to working together to deliver that affordability for New Yorkers.
Thank you.
Now, you heard the two of them, rhyme off a list of topics which they discussed in their meeting. There was obviously a discussion that took place before they went in front of the cameras. And you might have noticed that list, which included things like groceries and the cost of living and utilities and rent, didn't include Israel or Netanyahu. Now, before I show you what happened at the beginning of the Q&A that followed those introductory remarks, I want to comment on the reaction in the alternative media to this press conference. And I'm going to focus in particular on a breakdown I saw, I think it was yesterday, on Breaking Points. And by the way, I have a lot of respect for Breaking Points. I think they do excellent journalism. And they had a panel of 4 persons, including Ryan Grimm and Crystal Ball, 4 members of their journalistic staff, discussing what happened at the White House on Friday. And their theories essentially focused around the psychology of Donald Trump and the fact that he's a narcissist and he's susceptible to flattery. And Zohran Mamdani is reputed by everybody to be very charming. Even his worst enemies, grudgingly praise his interpersonal skills. And it was on the basis of that kind of, analysis of the psychology and the talents of these two men, or lack thereof in the case of Donald Trump, that they made sense or tried to make sense of the sudden and dramatic change in Donald Trump's attitude towards Mamdani. Now, I'll be the first to admit that their take on this, what happened in the White House, is plausible. It's entirely plausible. But there's something about this that I find completely and utterly implausible. And that is the idea that Donald Trump and Mamdani never discussed the topic of Israel or Netanyahu in their private meeting. I don't think I should have to explain why that is highly implausible, but basically, I think we can all admit that Donald Trump is very likely the most pro-Israel president in the history of the United States. Nothing seems to matter to that man more than Israel, and using Israel as a bludgeon in West Asia and doing whatever is necessary to facilitate and enable Israel's heinous crimes. You know, he's probably met with Netanyahu more than any other leader since he returned to the White House. He was in the Knesset. He was openly praising Miriam Edelson and more or less admitting that her priority in her life is not the United States, but Israel, just shamelessly admitting this in the Knesset. You know, he's put together this elaborate, fraudulent peace plan. He's sent billions upon billions, tens of billions of dollars of weaponry and economic aid to Israel. I mean, the man is literally obsessed with Israel, for Christ's sakes. And he's gone so far in his efforts to protect Netanyahu that he's actually demanded that the Israeli president, the war criminal Isaac Herzog, give Netanyahu a pardon, and has placed pressure on the entire Israeli judicial system in a flagrant and wild intervention in the domestic internal politics of Israel to give Netanyahu a free pass for his decades of rampant corruption. That's how far this man will go to advance the interests of the genocidal entity and to protect his little psychotic buddy, Bibi. So when you have a mayor of New York City, you know, such an important city, both domestically and internationally, the newly elected mayor, saying that Israel is committing genocide, which of course implicates Donald Trump himself, because Donald Trump and the people around him have been arming Israel to the teeth since January and throughout this genocide. And when you have him saying, Mamdani, that he's going to direct New York police to arrest the war criminal Netanyahu if he steps foot in the Big Apple, this is going to undoubtedly be a matter of the utmost concern to Donald Trump. So the idea that these two had a meeting for the very first time and the subject of Israel never came up, it strains credulity. It is simply unbelievable. And I would wager a house that not only did they talk about Israel and Netanyahu, but that was probably the number one priority of Donald Trump in his discussion, his private discussion with Mamdani. Now, with that as background, let us watch the balance of, I'm not going to show you the entire Q&A. I'm just going to show you the beginning of it because that is quite telling.
Any questions, please?
President Trump, Stephen Nelson from the New York Post. I had a question.
I just stopped there. It's a little quiet. You might not have heard it. The very first question, there's a whole gaggle of reporters there. You can't see them, but there's quite a few of them. They're very, obviously the press took a great interest in this meeting because of all of the brouhaha between the Republicans and the Democrats surrounding the election of Mamdani. So a lot of reporters in that room. Trump could have chosen any one of them to ask the first question, and he asked the guy from the New York Post. And, it's widely understood, and it is undoubtedly understood by Donald Trump, that the New York Post is basically a mouthpiece for Israel. That's all it is. So when Trump chose the New York Post little propagandist there to ask the first question, he probably understood perfectly well that the question was likely to have something to do with Israel. And here's what happened.
For you, and then also one for Mayor-elect.
Sure.
For you, you referred to Mr. Mamdani as a communist. Can you describe why you feel that way? And also, will you do anything to stop him from arresting Prime Minister Netanyahu if he visits New York?
So again, he asks about the fact that Trump called him a communist and then says, and will you do anything to stop Mamdani from arresting Netanyahu? This was all entirely predictable that this clown from the New York Post was going to ask that question. So here's what happens next.
Well, we didn't discuss your second part of the question. And on your first part, I mean, he's got views that are a little out there, but who knows? I mean, we're going to see what works, or he's going to change also. We all change. I changed a lot. From when I first came to office. It's now quite a while ago. It's quite a while. My first term was great. We had the greatest economy in the history of our country. We're doing even better now. We're doing much better now than we did even the first term. And I can tell you some of my views have changed. And we had discussions on some things. I'm not going to discuss what they were, but that I feel very confident that he can do a very good job. I think he's going to be. I think he is going to surprise some conservative people, actually, and some very liberal people.
So a number of points there, folks. First of all, he admitted that they talked about some things which they're not going to reveal to the press. He did explicitly deny that they talked about the arrest of Netanyahu, but he didn't deny that they talked about Israel. And by the way, I think his denial that they talked about the potential arrest of Netanyahu has zero credibility. The man lies through his teeth. Mamdani didn't say anything. He didn't confirm, Trump's account of what happened. He just sat there, stone-faced. But what I thought was most interesting and troubling was that he said that, people change their minds, and I changed my mind, and Mamdani may change his mind. And I think he's going to surprise some conservatives and some liberals too. So I think that is, if not proof, at least a hint that some kind of assurances were provided to Trump by Zohran Mamdani on the question of his attitude towards Israel. I can't, of course, provide any guarantee that that's the case. All I can say is that it's extremely unlikely that the subject of Israel didn't come up. And Donald Trump's attitude has suddenly and radically changed towards Mamdani. And he made these cryptic remarks about how Mamdani may surprise conservatives and the liberals who supported him, and about, people's minds changing over time. So I would suspect that there were some kind of assurances provided to Donald Trump by Mamdani. Exactly what the nature of them were, and I'm talking about assurances relating to Israel and Netanyahu. I have no idea what the nature of them, of the assurances was. But if in fact such assurances were given, we can safely say that they greatly pleased the Donald, because he did an absolute about face in terms of his public commentary on Zohran Mamdani. Now, I have to admit that my interpretation of these events is influenced by my own painful experience when it comes to the Democrats. And, I've talked about this a little bit on other episodes of Reason to Resist, but back in 2007, when I was, we're talking about 18 years ago, when I was considerably more naive politically than I am today, I got swept up in the whole hope and change shtick of the upstart presidential candidate, Barack Obama. And at a point in time when he was contesting the Democratic nomination with Hillary Clinton, and it looks like either one of them could emerge the winner. And, a lot of people, not just me, but tons of millions of people in the United States, and probably hundreds of millions of people around the world, were really excited about this young senator and his prospects for changing the nation at a time when the United States was heading into a financial crisis that was going to cause immense suffering to many American people. At that moment, I felt an obligation to do something, even though I'm not an American citizen. I have no right to vote, had none then, don't have any now. I felt an obligation to do something. And so even though I was extremely busy with the full-time practice of class actions law, I set aside my legal practice for 10 days, and I got in a car and I drove from Southern Ontario, a town called London, which is, that's where I lived at the time, which is a couple hours from Toronto. And I drove all the way to Indianapolis to volunteer for the Obama campaign in the lead up to the Indiana primary. And I was sent during those 10 days, by the campaign staff in Indianapolis into predominantly African-American neighborhoods for the purpose of persuading people to come out and vote. And that was, I don't regret that experience at all. It was a tremendously moving experience because, when I showed up, a Canadian, a white guy, didn't even have the right to vote, at the doorsteps of so many people in the African-American community in Indianapolis. I mean, the level of love and appreciation that I felt and received from our brothers and sisters in the city was really something. It was one of the most moving experiences, frankly, that I've had in my adult life. And at the end of it all, we, the campaign volunteers in Indianapolis, we were invited to the last major speech that Obama delivered before the Indiana primary was actually held. And we were given almost a front row view to the speech. And I remember I had a cheap phone at the time, a Motorola, and I snapped this photograph. You can see Obama sitting in a sea of people with his hope and change shtick behind him. He ended up, as I recall, actually winning the Indiana primary. And of course, he went on, to the surprise of many, to defeat Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination. And at that point, I was so enamored of the candidate, Barack Obama, that I went back to the United States again in the week leading up to the presidential election. And this time I was accompanied by a dear friend of mine. And we went to Pittsburgh along with some other Canadians who showed up and joined us there. And again, we volunteered for the Obama campaign, and we were asked to go into predominantly African-American neighborhoods in Pittsburgh to get out the vote. And there was, in fact, an article written about this in the Ottawa Citizen, the main newspaper in Canada's capital, entitled Barack's Canucks. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner there a photograph of me and my dear friend Atul. We're taking a break from handing out pamphlets in an African-American neighborhood, predominantly African-American neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And this article went on to discuss in some detail what we had done while we were in Pittsburgh volunteering for the Obama campaign. And I'll never forget the night that the presidential election was held and the victory of Obama was announced. I was in a union hall in Pittsburgh with my dear friend and these other Canadians who had come down to Pittsburgh and joined with us to assist the campaign, the Obama campaign. And when they announced that Obama was the winner, we all cried. Grown men, blubbering like babies, because we were so moved by Barack Obama's victory. And my friends, within a matter of 3 months, I knew, at least I myself and my friend, by the way, were pretty much convinced that we were chumps, that we'd been taken for suckers and fools. And why do I say that? Well, because Obama, just to give you a short list of things that happened immediately after Obama won the election, and even before he moved into the White House, he advocated aggressively for a massive bailout of these criminal and fraudulent banks. He did not hesitate to do that, even though he wasn't yet the president. But during December, when Israel launched a murderous assault on Gaza, and many of his supporters were wondering out loud, what are you going to do about this? Obama threw up his hands and said, well, I'm not the president. This is a matter for the president to deal with. But that didn't deter him from advocating aggressively for the bailout of these criminal and fraudulent banks. And finally, he signaled very clearly in the lead up to his move into the White House that he wasn't going to prosecute any Americans who had participated in the Bush-Cheney torture program, even though he himself openly admitted that the enhanced interrogation techniques used by those criminals did constitute torture. And that's just some of the things that revealed the true Obama. And it just got worse from there, from the time he entered the White House until he left the White House 8 years later. And so, to say that I feel a powerful sense of betrayal by the Democrats would be an understatement. I also kind of got snookered when Bernie Sanders tried to win the nomination in 2016, although that time I was much more circumspect and I didn't go down to the United States to volunteer for the Sanders campaign. I was a little bit too jaded at that point to make that kind of a sacrifice for a Democratic candidate. But now, after seeing Biden and Kamala Harris and Blinken and Sullivan and, all of these criminals doing everything possible to enable Israel's genocide over the last 2 years, I have zero confidence, in anyone who calls themselves a Democrat and who chooses to run under the banner of the Democratic Party. Mamdani knows perfectly well who's in charge in this party, and the people who are in charge in this party are genocidal war criminals. They are the persons who enabled Israel's genocide, what he himself acknowledges to be a genocide, over the past 2+ years, or at least until the time that Biden left the White House. And they've continued the leadership, I'm talking about the leadership, not the grassroots of the Democratic Party, to advocate for U.S. military and economic support for the genocidal entity, even up until this current time. And so I have to question, I feel obliged as a citizen of conscience and someone who's learned the hard way, I have to question the willingness of anybody who runs as a Democrat to hold Israel accountable, or even to deliver on any kind of transformational changes. I'm not saying that everything that Mamdani has said is a lie, is a misrepresentation. I think he does probably intend to try to implement a number of the main planks of his platform, his election platform, and I wish him well in that regard. I support the things that he has said he wants to do, and I'd very much like to be proven wrong about just how committed he is to the Palestinian cause. I'll be the first to applaud if it turns out that he is serious and orders the police to arrest the war criminal Netanyahu if and when he sets foot in New York City. But I must say, my friends, that I remain quite skeptical, and more so than ever after this circus with the Donald in the White House on November 21st. So with that, let me move on to my next subject, which is Israel's toxic brand. Today, Israel finds itself in an unprecedented crisis. Its image is radioactive. The primary reason for this, of course, is its mass slaughter of Palestinian civilians and the sadistic, boastful delight with which Israelis have murdered and maimed Palestinian children. But Israel's shocking cruelty to Palestinians is only part of a much larger problem. Quite apart from its war crimes and crimes against humanity, which have not stopped for 1 second and continue to this very day, Israel has a Jeffrey Epstein problem. And before I talk about recent developments in the sordid saga of Jeffrey Epstein's files, I just want to touch upon the history of this whole matter, just to remind people how long it was known that Epstein was a child sex predator. And I'm relying here for a very helpful timeline that was produced by the Miami Herald, one of whose reporters did stellar work in exposing the extent of Epstein's depravity. And according to this Miami Herald timeline, the revelations about Epstein's monstrosities began in 2005. In March of that year, a 14-year-old girl, I repeat, 14 years old, and her parents reported that Jeffrey Epstein molested her at a mansion in Palm Beach. In October of that year, with the police probe in full swing, one of Epstein's assistants called one of the girls just as she is being questioned, one of the girls who at that point emerged as an accuser, just as she was being questioned by police. Investigators begin interviewing more girls in that month, as well as Epstein's butlers, who tell them that Epstein had frequent visits from girls throughout the day. In 2006, police signed a probable cause affidavit charging Epstein and 2 of his assistants with multiple counts of unlawful sex acts with a minor. And then I'm not going to give you the whole timeline here. There's a lot in here. Let's just fast forward to a later year. In 2008, June of that year, Epstein's lawyers revisit plea negotiations, which at that point had been on and off. And Epstein appeared in a Palm Beach County courtroom where he pled guilty to state charges, 1 count of solicitation of prostitution and 1 count of solicitation of prostitution with a minor under the age of 18. He's sentenced to 18 months in jail, followed by a year of community control and house arrest. He is adjudicated as a convicted sex offender who must register twice a year in Florida. Okay, this was a sweetheart deal which was kept from Epstein's victims. And in July of that year, when his victims learned about the plea deal after the fact, it's amazing, such an abomination that they weren't consulted about the plea deal beforehand. They filed, the victims, an emergency petition to force federal prosecutors to comply with the Federal Crime Victims' Rights Act, which mandates certain rights for crime victims, including the right to be informed about plea agreements and the right to appear at sentencing. And in August of that year, 2008, Epstein's victims learned that he has already been sent to jail and that the federal investigation is over. In 2009, Epstein is released from the Palm Beach County stockade 5 months early. He registers as a sex offender and enters probation for a year, and is confined to his Palm Beach home, except to travel to his office in West Palm Beach. However, records show he frequently made trips to Manhattan and to his home in the U.S. Virgin Islands. In 2010, flight logs obtained as part of civil lawsuits against Epstein show an assortment of politicians, academics, celebrities, heads of state, and world leaders flying on Epstein's jets in the early 2000s, among them former President Bill Clinton, former National Security Advisor Sandy Berger, former Colombian right-wing President Andres Pastrana, and lawyer Alan Dershowitz. And it goes on and on and on. And the point really I want to make here is that by the time you get to 2010, it was widely known and understood, just on the basis of the public record, that Jeffrey Epstein was a child sex predator. So after these revelations, what have we learned about Jeffrey Epstein's activities and his buddies as a result of the release of the partial release of the Epstein files, and in particular, the most recent batch, which came out several weeks ago, is that Epstein had a very, very close and cozy relationship with Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak ain't just an Israeli. He is a former general in the genocidal military of Israel and a politician who served as the prime minister of Israel and the minister of defense of the genocidal entity from 1999 to 2001. He was leader of the supposedly left-wing Labor Party between 1997 and 2001, and again between 2007 and 2011. And he was also Minister of Defense from 2007 to 2013. So, Ehud Barak is a central figure in Israeli politics and military and intelligence matters during the past 25 years. And what we've learned, amongst other things, due to the recent release of documents, is that Ehud Barak met with the late disgraced financier and child sexual abuser. This is from the Times of Israel, what you see up on the screen here, dozens of times beginning in 2013. Okay, so this is well after it was widely known and understood that this monster was a child sex predator, Jeffrey Epstein. And Barak, and by the way, the Times of Israel is reporting, is repeating a report from the Wall Street Journal about Barak's dealings with Epstein. And Barak, they say, was among the list of Jewish names, including pioneering linguist and left-wing activist Noam Chomsky, longtime Bard College president Leon Botstein, and filmmaker Woody Allen, listed in a newly uncovered private calendar for Epstein. And so there's really no doubt that Ehud Barak, at a point when he continued to be a very important player in Israeli politics and intelligence matters, had very, very extensive dealings with this ultra-wealthy, known child sex predator. But it gets worse, folks. It has also been revealed that Epstein was a host frequently for an Israeli spy. It was the person in question is a military intelligence officer by the name of Yoni Koren, who was Ehud Barak's top aide. And this report says that Koren stayed in Epstein's Manhattan apartment on at least 3 occasions, including once in February 2013 while working as a senior aide to then Israeli Minister of Defense Ehud Barak. Yoni Koren made his intelligence career working in covert operations alongside the Mossad and remained a lieutenant colonel in reserve duty after he officially left the Intelligence Directorate. He stayed in Epstein's apartment again for 2 weeks in October 2014 and a third time for 10 days more in September 2015. There's been some excellent reporting done by DropSite News about the Epstein connections to Israeli intelligence. And DropSite, it is said here, this is actually a DropSite article you're looking at up on the screen, compiled evidence of these stays from schedules released by the White House Oversight Committee, the House Oversight Committee last month, and Barrack's hacked emails, originally released by Handala hack team and later shared by Distributed Denial of Secrets. On all three trips, Coren appeared to be conducting official or unofficial business. A Times of Israel article from late January 2013, a few weeks before Coren's first documented stay, identifies him as still actively serving as the bureau chief of the Israeli Ministry of Defense that month. And when Coren passed away in January 2023 of cancer, he was honored for his outstanding service to the genocidal entity. This, again, DropSite News says he remained one of Barrack's most trusted advisors and closest confidants throughout his military and civilian careers. On Coren's passing, Barrack wrote a eulogy for Coren, calling him, quote, a talented intelligence officer with endless loyalty to the role, the IDF, and the state, a brave man who knew no fear even when he stood in front of the forces of evil, or was mired in them while hanging out at the posh residence of a known child sex predator. So that is the story of Yoni Coren, or at least part of it. And I suspect that in the weeks ahead, there's going to be a lot more bad news for Israel, depending on just how much transparency we're going to get as a result of this newly signed law calling for the release of, or requiring, not calling for, but requiring the release of the Epstein files. So the Epstein revelations, as horrible as they are by no means the only public relations disaster that Israel is currently suffering. As I've mentioned, and as many of you will know, will have learned through your own observations, there are leading figures on the right of the political spectrum, very influential figures who are pretty much in open revolt about the Republican Party's slavish and unequivocal support for the genocidal entity. And of course, they include Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who just resigned from Congress, a stunning decision that is only drawing more attention to her opposition to AIPAC and to U.S. government support and Republican Party support for Israel. This resignation, I must say, is probably going to enhance her standing with a lot of Republicans and conservatives as a person of integrity. How often do you see something like this, that she's bailing out on Congress and doing so specifically because she doesn't feel that she can continue to perform fulfill her responsibilities in good conscience after Trump called her a traitor and vilified her for her opposition to Israel and her demands that the Epstein files be released. And I've mentioned several times recently that I've been paying close attention to Candace Owens, not because she and I agree politically on most things. We don't. We probably disagree. I know for sure we disagree on some very important issues. And if I sat down and had the chance to talk to her, I'm sure we would find other areas of disagreement. But she is highly influential. She's charismatic. She has the gift of the gab, very eloquent. And virtually every single one of her episodes, which are watched by a very large audience. Reportedly, she has the biggest podcast going now. And her audience leans predominantly to the right. And so it's very important to the future of Republican Party support and conservative support for Israel, what she's saying. And she's just relentless and unapologetic about condemning Israel and Zionists using the harshest language in virtually every episode. And I have to say, whatever my political disagreements with Candace Owens and also Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene may be, and there are many, it's a source of additional hope to me that people with that level of influence and in the Republican Party, in the conservative movement in the United States, are increasingly vocal about the fact that support for Israel by the US government is profoundly contrary to the interests of the American people. That is a serious, serious problem for Israel. I would go so far as to suggest that it is an existential problem for Israel. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if during the past 2 months, the number one thing that has preoccupied the war criminal Netanyahu is the opposition to U.S. government support for Israel by leading figures in the conservative movement, namely the three that I just mentioned. This really is a matter of life and death for the genocidal entity. They've lost the Democratic Party base. If they lose the Republican Party base, then it's just a matter of time before the U.S. government dramatically scales back or terminates altogether its lavish and indispensable economic and military support for the genocidal entity. Now, of course, it doesn't stop there. The radioactivity surrounding Israel, on both the right and the left, there are growing suspicions that Israel had something to do with the murder of Charlie Kirk. I certainly can't, warrant that that's true, but there's plenty of reason to be suspicious. And if you've been watching Candace Owens, you'll know that she's been talking about some mysterious Egyptian military aircraft that were apparently tracking very carefully the movements of Charlie Kirk and his spouse, Erica Kirk. Lots of questions there about what those military aircraft were doing in Provo, Utah at the time of Charlie Kirk's murder. This is a very serious problem. And, I think Owens is making real traction there in terms of raising questions that are extremely uncomfortable for the genocidal entity. Then you have a more recent and less discussed revelation, and that is that Volodymyr Zelensky's right-hand man, and remember Zelensky, this corrupt kleptocrat whose term ended as president of Zelensky in 2024, in the first half of 2024, but who remains in power by virtue of martial law. He said many times that he wanted his country to become a big Israel. And he was promoted by an Israeli Ukrainian oligarch named Komoloisky, who was accused by the United States government itself of a multi-billion-dollar bank fraud. And so in the most recent the most recent revelation surrounding corruption in Ukraine, it was revealed that Zelensky's right-hand man, a character by the name of Timur Mindich, was at the center of the corruption probe by the Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine. And what happened when Mindich was tipped off? He fled to Israel, the haven for criminals and persons suspected of high crimes and even treason against their own countries. And then in a similar vein, there is the sordid, disgusting tale of somebody named Alexandrovich. Tom Artyom Alexandrovich is an Israeli citizen and the executive director of the Defense Division of Israel's National Cyber Directorate. He was arrested in Las Vegas a couple of months ago for soliciting sex electronically with a minor. And here you have a report from the esteemed colleagues at the Electronic Intifada dating from August of this year, in which it recounts this was written by Ali Abunimah, how the Trump administration shielded this Israeli official charged with a child sex crime. And, for reasons that have never been adequately explained, U.S. authorities allowed this pervert to leave the United States after he was charged, and he's not returned since. After he fled the country, the acting U.S. attorney, the top federal prosecutor for Nevada, said that the feds would not prosecute Alexandrovich, leaving his prosecution to the less well-resourced Nevada authorities. The acting U.S. attorney's name is Sigal Chattah, who it turns out is Israeli-born and has been politically active with Zionist organizations. Now, this is not by any means an exhaustive list of all the ways in which Israel's brand has become toxic, but it should be enough to persuade you that Israel is, from a public relations perspective, in deep, deep trouble. It's in a deep hole, folks, and it just won't stop digging that hole deeper. including by, for example, appointing lunatics like Morton Klein to be the head of a major Zionist organization in the United States. It bears repeating that Israel is a geopolitical pipsqueak. Without massive Western government support, it cannot survive in its current form. And with opposition to Israel growing in the West, I maintain that Israel's days are numbered. This brings me to the third and final topic I wish to discuss with you today briefly, and that is recent developments in occupied Palestine and Lebanon. Yesterday, the Gaza Health Ministry provided an update as to Israel's daily murder of Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip. And here it is up on the screen. You'll see that the ministry reported, this is from yesterday, November 22nd, that during the prior 24 hours, 7 martyrs and 30 injuries had arrived at Gaza Strip hospitals, or during the prior 48 hours. It said that a number of victims were still under the rubble and on the roads. And it then provided the total tally for the so-called ceasefire. The ministry reported that since October 11, 2025, when this travesty, this fraud was declared effective by Western powers and their vassals, Israel had killed 318 Palestinians in Gaza and injured 788. Also, 572 bodies were retrieved from the rubble during that period. Many, if not substantially all of those people, were probably killed before this travesty of a ceasefire came into effect. The toll of the Israeli aggression, said the ministry, has risen to almost 70,000 people. This is the official number, undoubtedly a vast undercount because of the immense limitations in determining how many people have actually been killed directly or indirectly by Israel's onslaught. But the exact number as of November 22nd, the official number was 69,733 dead, 170,863 injured. You put that together, it is over 10% of the pre-October 7th, 2023 population of the Gaza Strip. Now, what this works out to is an average of 8 Palestinians killed and 19 wounded per day since October 11th, 2025. In addition, Israel continues to destroy civilian infrastructure in areas of Gaza it controls, and Israel has prevented any meaningful reconstruction in the areas of the Gaza Strip controlled by the resistance. The genocidal entity also continues to deprive Palestinians of the quantity of humanitarian aid that it agreed to provide. And here up on the screen, this is a clip from an article published by Haaretz yesterday. And you'll see the headline, Gaza's hunger crisis remains as death toll passes 300 since the so-called ceasefire began. Haaretz, obviously an Israeli newspaper, one that I think can fairly be described as antagonistic towards Netanyahu. It mentions also in the subtitle, Haaretz, that 2 Palestinian children have been killed on average each day since this travesty began, according to the Gaza Health Ministry and a UNICEF report. The UN says about 4,000 children in the enclave urgently need evacuation for life-saving treatment. And so anybody who claims that this constitutes a ceasefire should be immediately dismissed as either a propagandist or an ignoramus, to be perfectly blunt about it. Now, Israel's latest spasm of sadistic violence occurred on November 20th when the genocide forces massacred 32 Palestinians, including 12 children and 8 women. And here is some heartbreaking footage from the aftermath of that slaughter. Now, as usual, the genocidal Israeli entity had a preposterous pretext for its latest murder spree in the Gaza Strip. According to the Israeli military, a Palestinian gunman opened fire on troops stationed in the Gaza Strip. Now, the genocidal military itself acknowledges that this gunman didn't cause any injuries, let alone fatalities, and that he was killed. That he was killed by the Gaza Division Southern Brigade. And the Israeli military went on to say that this was a, quote, blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement. The baby killers who have continued to kill on average 2 children in Palestine, in Gaza alone, not just, that's just Gaza. They're the children and adults, the civilians being massacred and maimed and terrorized in the West Bank. Okay, I'm only talking here about Gaza, 2 children per day. It has the audacity to say that this gunman who didn't injure anybody and was killed, paid with his life for attacking the terrorists of the Israeli military who are in the Gaza Strip illegally perpetrating a genocide, that he paid for the attempt to attack them or alleged attempt to attack them with his life. Now, why would any sane person with an ounce of decency think that that isn't punishment enough for his attempt to attack the terrorists? Frankly, if he was, and nobody should take Israel at its word, of course, but let's suppose they're telling the truth, and in fact, the Palestinian gunmen did attack them. Well, given what they've been doing in Gaza over the last 2+ years and what they've done since the so-called ceasefire went into effect, which is to treat the ceasefire agreement like toilet paper, given the fact that there are reports of them, not only occupying more than 50% of the Gaza Strip, but encroaching even further on areas that are supposed to be controlled by Hamas or Palestinians themselves, given the ongoing starvation of the population, given the ongoing destruction of civilian infrastructure, any Palestinian would be completely entitled morally and legally to take up arms against the terrorists, the Israeli terrorists in the Gaza Strip. But let's assume that there is no justification for what this gunman allegedly did. Why isn't killing him enough to send a message? What kind of a sadistic psychopath would say, well, now we not only are going to kill him, but we're going to go out and murder dozens of Palestinian civilians just to teach those Palestinians a lesson? These people had no control over what the gunman did. Did the children killed by Israel on that day, November 20th, have any control over what this gunman did? No sane, decent person, nobody with an ounce of humanity would think that this was a measured or appropriate response to what Israel described as a blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement, even if Israel was correct to call it that. And given what Israel has done since the ceasefire into effect, that is an absolutely preposterous way to characterize what this lone gunman allegedly did. Now, this brings me to the whole question of why we even use the word ceasefire at all when we talk about Israel. When we talk about Israel, we should banish the word ceasefire from our lexicon, and we should call out forcefully any politician or so-called journalist who continues to mischaracterize what is happening in Palestine or Lebanon, for that matter, as a ceasefire. This brings me to the case of Lebanon. And today, the lunatic and cowardly Israeli Air Force bombed southern Beirut again. And here you can see a report from Al Jazeera published today. 5 killed as Israel bombed southern suburbs of Beirut despite ceasefire. This is, I think, the 5th time since the ceasefire went into effect late last year that it has bombed mercilessly southern Beirut. Of course, it has been attacking southern Lebanon and eastern Lebanon on a near daily basis since this thing went into effect. And the supposed guarantors of this ceasefire agreement, France and the United States, predictably have done absolutely nothing to rein Israel in, and in fact have justified and encouraged its ongoing aggression against the people of Lebanon. And you can see from the subtitle of this Al Jazeera article that Netanyahu, his office, said that Hezbollah's chief of staff was the target in the attack. So to say that this was a provocation what would be a gross understatement. And here you can see Hezbollah's immediate response to this aggression. The deputy head of Hezbollah's political council, Mahmoud Kamati, according to the Resistance News Network, said, "We are committed to full coordination with the Lebanese state and army. Today's aggression on the southern suburbs breaks a new red line and is a U.S. green light for escalation. There's no choice but to adhere to the resistance, and continuing this violation cannot be accepted. We do not comment on what the enemy says about the response, and the leadership is studying the matter and will make the decision. The resistance is the one that decides how to respond to this aggression. We're working to confirm the identity of the figure targeted by the Israeli aggression. All possibilities are possible after today's targeting, and the leadership will make the appropriate decision." So it sounds like they've not yet determined, at least as of the time this statement was issued, whether the chief of staff of Hezbollah was targeted, and if so, whether he was killed. And they're not clearly stating that they are going to finally respond militarily. They've been extraordinarily restrained. The entirety of Lebanon, not just Hezbollah, its ally Amal, other resistance groups, and of course the puppet government of the West, led by Aoun, have been extremely restrained, absurdly so in light of the constant provocations and ceasefire violations by Israel. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that this can't endure. The Lebanese people, and particularly Hezbollah and its allies, are not going to exercise restraint forever, particularly if they're now targeting again the top leadership of the organization. And it's only a matter of time before full-blown war breaks out, and we may be on the cusp of exactly that. And finally, this brings me to a report in the last couple of days by the Israeli media, and specifically Haaretz, about a crisis in the Israeli military. And as you can see from this article published on Friday, an analysis by Amos Harel, a senior journalist at Haaretz, the IDF faces a manpower crunch and spiraling costs as it prepares for multi-front wars. And according to Haaretz, Israel needs to replenish vast quantities of munitions. These are the words it uses: vast quantities of munitions and interceptor missiles. And as you saw, it uses the phrase acute crisis in manpower. And I'm quoting here, "This week, the Knesset was informed that around 600 career officers have requested early retirement. This reflects a much broader trend across units and directorates, driven in part by the harsh experiences of the recent war," close quote. In other words, these latte-sipping baby killers can't stand the heat in the kitchen anymore and want to get out. The personnel directorate, says Haaretz, is reporting a shortage of around 12,000 conscript combat troops. Reservists have already been informed that they may be called up for 70 days next year. And again, this is a quote: "Israel's army is falling apart. It must be rebuilt from scratch. These requirements translate into unprecedented budgetary demands. Broadly, the Defense Ministry is projecting a 2026 budget of 144 billion shekels, which is about $44 billion US. Now, if there's a full-blown war next year, then Israel's military spending is likely to be far in excess of 44 billion. But let's suppose that a miracle happens and that Israel doesn't provoke a full-blown war in the next year. 44 billion is approximately 8.1% of Israel's 2024 GDP. And by the way, the reported GDP for 2024, 540 billion. Personally, I don't believe that's the real figure. I believe that that overstates dramatically the wealth of the genocidal entity, the national wealth of the genocidal entity, for a whole bunch of reasons. But let's just assume it's true. That's, 44 billion is 8.1% of 2024 GDP. That level of military spending is well beyond, as a percentage of GDP, that of any Western nation, including Western nations that have far more economic stability and political stability than Israel does. And the Haaretz article concludes with these revelations, quote, "At the same time, global demand for Israeli weapons has surged since the war. Countries that distance themselves from Israel, in some cases impose partial arms embargoes due to its actions in Gaza, are now quietly seeking ways to resume defense deals. In an ironic twist of history, Israel is helping to upgrade the defense capabilities of Germany and Japan, two of the three members of the Axis during the Second World War, the Nazi-led Axis. Yes, that is indeed an ironic twist of history, isn't it? And accordingly, India has now become Israel's leading partner in massive joint production contracts, all of which only strengthens my view, by the way, that the days of the genocidal entity are numbered. It is hitching its boat to the Western Titanic, and the Western Titanic is going down, my friends. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on November 23rd, 2025.